We are here to talk about Plugins 2 Cookbook. How many of you have written a Plugins 2, an OSGI plugin? Oh, a good amount. I was telling somebody that this conference is so much more fun for me because last year I was talking about Plugins 2, and everyone just kind of nods their head and yeah, whatever, because A, it wasn't really out, and B, you know, you guys are writing plugins that have to support older versions, so you can't even think of any new technologies. This time, people actually write it. So actually have intelligent conversations about, this works, this doesn't, whatever. Much more fun. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through a set of recipes. Cookbook the recipe seems an obvious metaphor to look at things you could do with Plugins 2. Sounds like a little jingle. Now, some of these are probably not the more common ones, or they may be more common. Hopefully, at least one or two is new to you. So we'll get started. If you remember back in the AMPS talk earlier, we showed, Ben excellently showed off how you can modify a plugin and you reload it and you get to see the changes. That's all nice and fine. However, he was changing, I believe, an XML file. And that's kind of sad, the fact that you have to reload an entire OSGI bundle just because you changed an XML file. So you can actually do one better. Plugins 2 allows you to, and actually this does only work for OSGI plugins, allows you to automatically reload resource files. And what I mean by that is you can modify your JavaScript file and go to the browser and see the change immediately. No PI, no installation, no waiting at all. So how do we do this? Well, our ingredients for this particular recipe is you will need one OSGI plugin, and you'll need at least one Velocity, FreeMarker, JavaScript, CSS, whatever, resource file that you want to reload. How it works is pretty simple. Well, somewhat simple. And also I should note that I don't think AMPS automatically does all this for you, or sorry, the SDK. He put it on Monday, so that made the 1.0. Yeah. Woohoo! Okay, so this stuff, if you're using the SDK, all automatic and it just works. If you're not using the SDK, shame on you. You need to do all this stuff. That is your punishment. It's not too bad, really. You need to find the directory which contains the resources. And usually source main resources if you're doing a simple plugin. It might be more complicated if you have multiple plugins and whatever else, but that probably isn't many of you. You're going to start the web app, and here's where it gets interesting. With the system property, plugin.resource.directories set. And you set it to the path, the directory, the absolute path of the directory, which contains the resource files. Then you can change files, and you can reload the browser, and it'll work. What's happening is in the plugin system, we look for the system property, and if we find it, anytime we try to load a resource out of the plugin, we go straight to this directory and load it from there first. You can specify a comma-delimited set of directories, so if you had multiple places that had these resource files, it'll go through each one of them. If it doesn't find it, it'll then load it from the bundle. This is a great way if you're doing gadget development, reloading will drive you nuts. If you're doing anything with web UI, any CSS, you don't want to have to reload and have those pauses. You want to be able to just edit, view, edit, view, edit, view. And this technique will get you there. So that's one recipe. Recipe number 2, product-specific modules. Now, I think if I remember right from last time, we only had Jonathan who had done a cross-product plugin. So this one probably isn't as interesting, but since you are all going to be so inspired, you're going to go home and write cross-product plugins, you might want to know this. You can write a plugin that will support multiple products. And specifically, you can have a module that applies to one product and another module that applies to another. How do we do this? Once again, we need to have one OSGI plugin. We need to have a need to have this plugin support multiple products. And we need to have a module where we want to run in one product, in one Atlassian application, but not in the other. How it works is actually quite simple. In your module descriptors right here, there's a new attribute that you can add to any module descriptor called application. And with this, you can say application equals Confluence. What that will mean is that when you install this plugin into Confluence, this module will be activated. When you install it into Jira, you won't see it at all. This is particularly useful if you have a cross-product plugin, and let's say you have some web items that apply to Confluence to put menus in certain places, some web items apply to others. If you have a specific product-specific one, like Xwork in this example, you can use that. It's, again, a nice way to build a simple plugin that supports multiple products without having to have people, okay, which plugin do I need to download? Which one do I need to install? They just, here's the one plugin. You can just use it everywhere. Kind of handy. Quick XML plugins. The goal here is we have, let's say we want to add some web items to Confluence, or we want to add some web items to Jira. But we don't want to have to use the SDK maybe. We don't want to have to deal with all the hell of Maven. We don't want to have to build and compile and IDEs and all that stuff. What we want is we want to be able to just have a text editor and a web item. Let's say we wanted to add a menu link on the new Jira nav bar, or we wanted to add a item on one of the Confluence menus. We can do that simply with the text editor by doing this. We can create an Atlassian plugin XML file and actually upload that plugin XML file directly to our application. No Maven, no build, no jars, no compiling, no anything. You can actually take the plugin XML, and that is a plugin. Now, of course, it doesn't work if you have any Java code or external resources, because then you would need the jar technique. But if you have a few web items, or I think user macros can support inline, not user macros. I think there's a few other, there might be one or two others that you can do just in the XML file. Anything that you can use this technique to just simplify it. This is particularly nice for you want to get other people involved in plugin development. You can write some dynamic modules, as we'll see later, custom modules that will allow other people. You can just edit an XML file, get a plugin. It just cuts out one or two of the steps. And that gets to a more complicated talk. So the recipes that we've done so far are pretty straightforward. You add this XML attribute, you add the system property, and you're done. Now we're going to get a little bit more interesting with dynamic plugin types. So what we want to do here is we want to add extension points to your plugin. How many of you, well actually, how many of you would find extension points to your plugin a useful thing? Okay, a good amount of you. So what we're talking about here is we're talking about a plugin where you might want to have people provide new implementations of an interface that you want to load up at runtime. Or you might want other plugins to provide new configuration options or new themes. Let's say you had a theme builder and you want to allow people to provide themes, or any type of thing where you want to allow people at runtime to extend your plugin and add new functionality. You're going to need, again, a plugin. You're going to need for this, and I should also mention, you also have to have a desire to see the dirty underbelly of the plugin system, because you're going to be dealing with some very internal plugin classes. It's not completely pretty under there, but the end result for your users and people that want to extend it will be pretty, and that's what matters. So first off, we need to create a module class. Now, you can have a plugin. Let me step back. Does everyone know what I mean when I say plugin module? Yes? No? Okay, some confusion. Let me step back. This is a plugin module. So it is, if you're looking at the Atlassian plugin XML, it's going to be an XML element inside this plugin XML, which is going to define something, an XWork, a servlet, a filter, a web item, anything like that. Usually, you get a set list of these things that you can use when you're developing a plugin. What this feature allows us to do is create our own, so that now we can have, in this example, we're going to create a dictionary plugin module. And we're going to allow people to create dictionary implementations, and then we're then going to consume those dictionary implementations in our plugin. Make sense? Questions? Okay. So we're going to have a simple interface here, which is going to get definition. We pass it in the text or the word that we want to define, and we get back the string definition. And our plugin, let's say it's a plugin that provides a fancy Ajax-y dictionary to Confluence or Jira or something. And we want to allow people to plug in new languages. You know, maybe we want to have them jargon languages. Maybe there should be a Java plugin which provides a bunch of new Java words, or a C++, or if you're in the military acronyms, you know, whatever. So we created a class, and then we get to the more complicated bit. We need to create a module descriptor. This is a bunch of code, but really the thing you want to pay attention to is this little bit right here. This is when we're initializing the module descriptor. The module descriptor is a class that represents that XML element. So that little XML element, let's say the XWork from before, that gets turned into an XWork module descriptor. All the attributes that you set on that element get turned into, stored as properties on the module descriptor. So we have, and you can see here, we're getting the element and we're pulling out the language. So we're going to allow people to define a dictionary, and we're going to allow them to specify the language that their dictionary is for. We're going to store that into our language field. When we want to get the module, we do some auto wiring. This is a little bit magic here that allows us to do things like constructor injection. You're able to, as you're normally used to, define dependencies in your constructor or setters and get it automatically injected. So that's a little bit of stuff you need to copy in, and then we're going to allow us to get the language. Then we need to define our module type. So we created a dictionary module descriptor. Now we need to define this new module type. We're going to use the module type module, just to be confusing. We're going to give it a key that's going to be a dictionary, and we're going to give it this module descriptor. So this was our dictionary module descriptor. This is us using that module descriptor. This key right here is important because whenever someone uses us, this is the name that they're going to use for an XML element. For example, this is someone using our new module type. So we said key equals dictionary. Here you have someone using dictionary. You see them using the language, English. There's the class. So they're providing an implementation of this interface that you defined earlier. As far as they can tell, this module type always existed. It's part of the system, but it's actually being provided by another plugin. This is a common technique that we use in Atlassian. For example, the gadget module type is actually provided from a gadget plugin. It's actually not built into the system. Same thing with the REST module type, another example of a dynamic one. And finally, you as the plugin need to access all the dictionary implementations out there. Here's how you do it. You call the plugin accessor, and you say, give me all dictionary module descriptor instances. That will give you back a list, and then once you have that list of instances, you can call get language, get module to get the actual dictionary class, all that sort of thing. Any questions on that? Did that make sense? Yes? A few head nods, that's good. So again, a very powerful technique. It allows you to extend the plugin system as if it was built that way. You're able to add new plugin types. I don't think you can override existing plugin types, but it's a very powerful thing, not only if you want to provide extensions for your own plugin, you just want to provide a general service like the REST plugin does. So our final recipe of the day, dynamic plugin modules. This is, again, another advanced one, but it can be very powerful in the right circumstances. Our goal here is traditionally when you're defining plugin modules, you're putting elements in the Atlassian plugin XML. But what if you don't know what modules you want at build time? What if at runtime you want to dynamically register a new web item or a new servlet or a new action? You really don't have a way to do that. Well, you do. I'm obviously going to tell you about it, but normally you would think that you don't have a way to do that. Web item is a great one. Maybe you want to create 5, 6, 7 web items based on some information that you only know at runtime. So that's what we're trying to get here. We're trying to dynamically create plugin modules without statically knowing it when we're building the plugin. Again, not needed for every plugin. In fact, I'd probably say it's not needed for 90% of the plugins. But when you need it, it can be damn powerful. So again, you need an OSGI plugin. You need a module that you want to register at runtime. So let's say, I think I'm going to use a web item in this case. And you have to have mad debugging skills. Because anytime you're going to be doing some kind of weird thingy in the plugin system, be prepared for some, well, weirdness. So what I'm going to show you is show you how to make it possible. It's not clean yet because, again, it is a more advanced thing most people don't need to do. But you will have some iterations like, well, I'll tell you when I get to it. So first you need to declare a component. You don't have to do it via component, just happens to be the simplest way. Now for those of you who are used to OSGI, this may be old hat, but those of you who aren't, I'll just tell you, when you're creating a component, you're basically creating a Spring Bean. That's all that happens in the background. So I could have created Spring XML to do the exact same thing, but I just do a component because it's familiar to most people. So I'm going to create a component, a Spring Bean, called Dyno Modules Register. Doesn't really matter. Now I'm going to make this component. Since this is a Spring Bean, you can do all the normal Spring things, like implement servlet context aware, or implement, what's another one, initializing bean, or actually I think that would be, yeah, implement initializing bean, all these different Spring things. Well, one of the things that Spring Dynamic Modules allows you to do is implement bundle context aware, and you get the bundle context. How many know what the hell a bundle context is? A few, okay. It's an OSGI thing. A bundle context is what allows you to interact with the OSGI system, and I probably should have mentioned that as well. This example is going to be showing OSGI specific stuff. So it is a little bit more advanced. Anyways, you get a hold of a bundle context. A bundle context has a number of useful methods on it that allows you to interact with the OSGI system. The one we're going to be using, as you'll see later, is register service. So we need to get a hold of the bundle context, and we need to create an instance of the descriptor. So if you remember before, we have an XML element and then a class that represents that element called the module descriptor. We need to create instances of that module descriptor, which are going to represent the modules that we want to create dynamically at runtime. Now, the easiest way to create a new instance of a module descriptor is to do a subclass. Subclass the module descriptor, so and then override a bunch of stuff. And this is where I talked about the debugging skills. You'll think you only need to override one or two getters. You'll find out you also have to override get key, and get complete key, and also this and also that. So it's a little bit of trial and error to get this kind of working. But you create your own module descriptor. This allows you to create and initialize a module descriptor programmatically. Module descriptors used to be ran from XML, so they're kind of all built for XML. There's no setters, for example, because they're expected to be passing in an XML element. But since you'll be creating this module descriptor at runtime, you'll have the values in Java code, and you want to initialize the module descriptor with the Java code. So the simplest way to do that is to create a subclass and maybe a constructor that takes the unique bits. In this case, we're talking about web items, so you'll probably have a URL or a tooltip or an icon. So you might have a constructor that allows you to pass in those bits of information. Next, we need to create and register new modules. So now that we have a subclass, now that we can create new instances of this module, we now want to create them at runtime based on whatever criteria we have. And how that works is you use the bundle context, that's what CTX is here, and we register a new service. We register an OSGI service. And we register the service under the interface module descriptor. The plugin system will be watching for new module descriptors, and as soon as the service comes online, it will say, that module descriptor, and it is for my plugin, and it will attach it for the plugin. And you can see here we're going to create the new module descriptor, probably passing in some data to initialize it properly. Now this is a really interesting technique because you can not only register modules for your plugin, but you can also register them for any plugin in the plugin system. So you could create a plugin that will, based on some criteria, create modules for other plugins. For example, let's say that you had a convention that people put the servlets in a certain directory. You could actually scan that, find new plugins that come online at runtime, and build it for them. So there's some really complex stuff that you can do here. For example, I use this technique to create a JavaScript plugin. It allowed you to create a jar of JavaScript code, no Java code at all. You install that JavaScript jar into your system, and all of a sudden it turned into a plugin. And it did that because I had another plugin that was watching for it and created a bunch of modules for it at runtime. So it's a very powerful thing. Again, most of you will never ever need to do it, but if you ever do, you can do some really cool stuff. Now, before I say questions, I just want to again point out the Atlassian plugin system is open source. If you ever talk to me, you hear me say again and again and again, download it, hack it, fork it, create patches, whatever. It's there for you. If you're building your stuff on top of it, you're needing some kind of feature, please let us know. Feel free to make patches. Feel free to fork it. Feel free to get involved. I'm happy to give commit access if that's what it takes. We want to get the community involved. So those are just a few tips to do some things that we needed to get out of the plugin system. Chances are you have your own use cases and your own things that you want to get out of the plugin system. So please, get involved. You guys are all developers, very smart folk. I'd love to work with you more. Any questions? Yes?
Are there example plugins that people can hack that implement any of those?
The example plugins, the question was, is there any example plugins that we can use to implement those? Yes, actually. As I mentioned, the gadget one uses some of these techniques. It doesn't use that last one. It uses the dynamic module type. The REST plugin also uses dynamic module type. Registering modules at runtime, the dynamic plugin modules, that technique, there is a project that mentioned the JavaScript plugin that allows you to build plugins via just pure JavaScript. It uses that technique, and that's in Atlassian Labs, so you can check that out. Any other questions? All right, thanks.